Hi everyone, it's Elizabeth here. So I wanted to do this video today in regards to how to tame the ego. So planet Earth is basically an incarnation of polarity. It's opposite energies, the north, the south, the east, the west, positive, negative, light and dark. And it also is kind of this uh, place where we have to discover our egos and learn how to shed the ego. Now, you do need ego in some sense to operate in life or to have some sort of success to some degree, but there is a balancing or a tipping point when the ego can go against you or harm society. You have the inferior ego, which is I'm not good enough, I'm not able to do anything, I can't succeed. And then there's the superior ego, which is I'm better than everybody, everybody else is below me. So basically, the ego defines our personalities, allowing us to experience polarity while living in the physical world. So the ego is a lot of that. The mundane kind of practical, logical, rational part of our mind. Um, and a lot of times when you're so stuck in the ego, it can hinder or suppress spiritual growth or soul evolvement. An untamed ego is a very dangerous thing because an untamed ego is flying by the seat of the emotions. Whether that emotion is anger or rage or frustration or um well, generally the dangerous end of the ego is more of that shadowy piece, which is like anger, rage, frustration. That's where things can get very destructive. You know, people who cause damage or people who are like serial killers, their ego is compensating and running by these emotions that are pushing them to do something evil for the benefit of their own gain because they think that they want it's like a power control struggle that they're having. So it's kind of this combination of an untamed ego coupled with uncontrollable emotions, and that's almost like combustion. It will kind of manifest into something very dangerous. So if you think about the ego as like a shield over the spirit, that is where that shield has to kind of be broken into or removed at some point to be able to self analyze, to evolve yourself on a deeper level. Obviously, people who have a negative or a very low ego, like the inferior ego, they have to learn how to develop themselves into a more positive place to understand that they are worthy of love, they are worthy of um, success or doing things beneficial for people and the planet. Most of what we see today is an overdrive of the inferior ego, and a lot of times that results in power struggles. And that's where things like abuse and taking advantage of other people begin. But the thing is, once you learn to start to tame the ego, so the ego on a physiological level is really rooted in a lot of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight. That is where you're in the lower lizard brain. I'm very logical and rational, so you do have to operate with logic and rational thinking. But when you're operating in fight or flight, that you're disconnected from your higher self. So when you are in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest phase of the body, that is where you can really tap into the higher self and tap into the soul. You're in those moments of rest and digest when you're sleeping, when you're doing meditation, maybe when you're just relaxing in a park or doing something like art therapy. You're obviously not in fight or flight when you're, painting and drawing. You're in the flow. You're kind of into a part of you that is connecting to that creative brain. Now, I'm not saying that we have to disconnect from being logical and rational because there are a lot of think about the artist, like Van Gogh who cut off his ear. It's like a lot of artists are so tapped into their emotions that they're uncontrollable in general, so they have to tap into the logical part of the brain. Anyways, let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about the ego and start to go into things about how to tame the ego. So, our ego can be easily managed and directed towards supporting our spiritual pursuits. And when the ego is not self focused, it becomes increasingly heart centered and unity minded. So, while the ego is fixated in life in the physical world, we can aspire to get the ego on board with helping ourselves to become more spiritual or holistic or one focused centered. So, it's about that coupling piece, integrating both the spirit and the ego. Basically, what you want to do with your ego is you want to maintain balance and harmony. So, one way to do that is to start being humble. You see some of the most spiritual leaders on the planet, like Gandhi, they're not very egotistical people. They're more humble. They don't believe that they deserve certain things. They don't have a victim mentality. They are just present in the world in this kind of vast universe that we have, and they serve through a balanced ego, a lot of times having humility. If you want to start taming your ego, you have to learn how to be a little bit generous. That's a big lesson on this planet. And, in this society or culture of hoarding and deserving that, believing that we all deserve certain things, or stealing and theft, those are triggers of the ego. And being generous and sharing and caring, that's a little bit more on the part of the ego that is present with a lot of unconditional love. It's sharing and caring without the expectation of getting anything back, and that is where a humble ego really serves. It's not about being a doormat and getting taken advantage of, or accumulating your yogi karma points for just sharing and giving your time away for free. That's not the point. But a lot of times people do things as a transaction, so they're going to donate or they're going to share in terms of feeling like they deserve something back. A true humble person and a pure heart gives a lot of not necessarily material things, but gives their time or their energy without the expectation of getting anything in return, or feeling like they deserve something just because they gave something. So it's not transactional. A tamed ego is very grateful for the experiences that they have, whether it is positive or negative. This is where you get out of that attachment of good and bad, and then you just start to seek balance, or see these difficult times in your life as opportunities to learn how to grow and challenge yourself and evolve. Along with being having a humble ego, one way to tame your ego is by pausing and being more contemplative rather than reacting. So, for example, you think before you speak. Being reactive is an explosion of visceral emotion that is happening in that moment in time. Now, if you're talking about this on an astrological level, the water signs, not so much Scorpio, but I see this like Cancers and Pisces people, or like the fire signs. They react so emotionally that it's just like, holy shit. Like Sagittarians can be so damn impulsive because they're moving so fast. It's like their shoes are on speed dial. And then, just the water signs in general are like emotional messes half the times. So they react with emotion rather than thinking before they speak. And that is a lot of times when you're very contemplative, or you step back and you don't send off that email right away, or you don't react to something right away. It allows you to get more into that parasympathetic nervous system rather than reacting through your fight or flight kind of survival mode. So we want to start to tame the ego, you want to tap into the higher mind. So that will make you pause, think, and reflect before reacting rather than just reacting on the spot. That's not going to happen every single time. We do have to, be a little bit of quick with our reactions at some point in time. Like if somebody's trying to rob you, you're not going to sit there and start meditating. You're going to react. But a lot of times in a lot of our actions in life, it's about thinking before you speak. Being humble also to tame the ego along with being humble is kind of being quietly confident. A lot of the Bible talks about this. It's like, you know, I think there's a verse in the Bible that just speaks on kind of sharing, but doing it privately. Like you don't have to do it publicly. So a lot of the stuff you see online, like altruism, you have to ask or think or contemplate, like, are people really being altruistic? Like if they're doing a video about donating, I don't know, cookies to homeless people, are they really doing that out of the generosity of their own heart, or are they doing that for the seek and praise of society, seeing them doing this nice caring act? So is it really altruistic? Is it really selfless? Or are you being kind of selfish to have to publicly display this piece so you receive attention, or your business gets kind of, quote unquote, brownie points for doing something nice? That is where a lot of times you have to think about things, and living in this social media me culture society where everything has to be publicly displayed is very detrimental, because it's fueling the ego more, and it's fueling this sense of identity that we have to fit in. And that's another thing on how to tame the ego. The ego doesn't care about fitting in. For example, if you're shopping, if you're going to, I don't know, let's say like Nordstrom to buy really expensive clothes in order to fit in or to be liked, that is your ego talking to you. That is you fulfilling your ego to seek external praise from society in order to feel better about yourself, or to feel loved, or to feel accepted. There's a difference between that and just saying like you've tried 5 different pairs of jeans, and you know what, these kind of more expensive pairs of jeans are the ones that fit your body the most and you can afford it. Like that's a little bit different. Being loyal to a brand because it's like that's the product or that's the type of clothing that works best for you. But when you're seeking praise and approval, like having to wear Coach or Gucci just to feel more loved or accepted from society, that's a lot of where the ego is very unhealthy, and it doesn't work like that long term, because it's this cycle. Like if you start to become poor, or you lose your job, or you're gonna have to keep accumulating like $500 suits in order to feel worthy in life. Like that's a lot of soul development that has to happen. Being compassionate, what can others, instead of asking yourself like what can others do for me, it's like how can I help, how can I serve, without that expectation of receiving anything back. And that's where it's being genuine and living more from the heart center rather than living in chronic selfishness. Now, that's a whole other topic in itself. I do think there is a little bit of a balance there. And, learning to laugh at yourself, having a sense of humor, and just kind of being able to poke fun at yourself, that is in itself is part of a healthy ego. A very unhealthy ego is chronic self-deprecating humor, or an unhealthy ego is chronically making fun of other people. That is unhealthy. But to be able to laugh and enjoy life and poke fun at yourself, like I tell people all the time, like I'm a little more logical and rational these days, but I'm a quirky spiritual person, and I can, definitely laugh at myself for believing in the stars, or believing in, my zodiac sign and things like that. Like that's part of life, and not losing that sense of humor. You don't want to be so uptight all the time. And the last thing to talk about how to tame your ego is just being open to new perspectives that are outside of your own. We live in a very complicated world, and the world is driven by ego. It's why there's been war and fighting and all this shit for thousands of years that have never changed. It's the same story with different characters because history repeats itself, and we are chronically in a world that is battling ego. And until the entire collective environment gets on board of a spiritual ship and works on themselves and redefines their ego and redefines, new perspectives in life, nothing's going to change. It's just not. Everything is going to be ran the same. It's just going to look a little differently because times change and modernism and technology has changed the way of the world. But just embracing new perspectives and allowing them to expand our mind, to expand the human experience, which is spiritual growth and evolvement. A lot of yogis talk a lot about the revolution starts within you. It starts within changing yourself. If you want to change the world, you can change yourself. And that has that ripple effect. Doing mass changes where there's war and, decimating communities and people like that is not helping at all, because that is the ego coupled with really frustrated emotion flying by the seat of the pants to do things that are very disruptive. Now, there are healthy parts of the ego. I don't think you need to shed your ego completely. I do think you need to have a little bit of ego. But we have to learn how to tame the negative aspects of the ego in order to have a healthy ego that is more in harmony and in balance with the spirit. So these are some thoughts that I have. I hope everybody is well. And if you have any thoughts on how to tame the ego, I would love to hear about them below. If not, thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing, and see you next time. Bye.